He didn't look up, didn't even glance over his shoulder, just waved his hand toward the corner of the office the way you'd wave away a fly, dismissive, bored, completely certain that the person behind him didn't matter enough to warrant eye contact. She stood in the doorway of the 42nd floor corner office, bucket in hand, wearing her blue uniform with the small gold name tag that read Rosa. She looked at the back of his head, at the perfectly pressed suit, at the man who had occupied this space for 3 years and who, in 3 years, had never once turned around to see her face. She said, quietly, "Of course, miss. Hargrove." He still didn't turn around. The 3 interns sitting on the leather couch across the room stared at the floor. Not one of them said a word. The silence in that office was the kind that has weight, the kind that presses down on people who know something is wrong, but have decided it is safer to look away. She had no idea, in that moment, what was coming, and neither did he. Because in 11 days, she would walk into that same building, not through the service entrance, not with a mop, not in a blue uniform, and she would sit down at the mahogany table on the 42nd floor and open a folder. And the first page of that folder would have his name on it. And at the bottom, it would have her signature. Have you ever worked so hard for someone who never bothered to learn your name? Hold that feeling, because this story is for you. Let me take you back. 3 years earlier, Rosa Eliana Vega was 51 years old when she took the night shift cleaning job at Hargrove Capital Partners. She had not planned to be there. Nobody plans to be there. She had spent 22 years as a certified public accountant at a mid-sized firm in the city. A woman who understood balance sheets the way some people understand music, intuitively, completely, with a kind of quiet love for the language of numbers. But her firm had been acquired.
And the acquiring company had decided that the staff didn't fit the new culture.
That phrase, "doesn't fit the new culture," is one of the cruelest inventions of the modern workplace. It means everything and nothing at once. It cannot be argued with. It leaves no fingerprints. Rosa was out. 51 years old. 2 decades of experience, and suddenly no one was returning her calls. She had a daughter in her 2nd year of college, studying, of all things, finance, on a partial scholarship that covered tuition but nothing else. She had a mortgage on a small house in the kind of neighborhood where people still wave at each other from their front porches, where the driveways are narrow and the kitchens are small, and the people who live there are, without exception, working harder than anyone gives them credit for. She had $4,200 in her savings account, and exactly 17 weeks before that was gone. She had applied to 41 positions in 6 months. She had received 4 callbacks and 0 offers. At 51, in an industry that had quietly decided it preferred people who were younger and cheaper and less certain of their own worth, she was learning what invisibility felt like from the inside. She took the cleaning job not because she had given up. She took it because she understood numbers. And the numbers said, keep moving. She kept always a small red notebook in the front pocket of her uniform. It had been her mother's. Her mother, Pilar, had come to this country with $40 and a 4th grade education and had spent 40 years cleaning other people's offices and other people's hotel rooms and other people's floors. And in all that time, she had filled 17 of these red notebooks with observations about people, about money, about how the world actually worked behind its polished surfaces.
She had given the last one to Rosa on the morning Rosa graduated from college. And she had said, "The people who make the money are not always the smartest ones in the room. They are only the ones who stayed in the room long enough." Rosa kept that notebook close. She wrote in it every night. And every night, for 3 years, she cleaned the offices of Hargrove Capital Partners,
including the corner office on the 42nd floor, belonging to one Mr. Preston Hargrove III. Preston Hargrove had inherited his position the same way he had inherited his cufflinks, his club membership, and his last name, from a father who had inherited it from his father before him. He was not unintelligent. That would be too simple. He was something more dangerous. He was intelligent enough to sound competent, but not curious enough to know what he didn't know. He filled the gap between those two things with confidence, and he had learned early in his life that confidence in a good suit could move very far in a world that mistakes presentation for substance. He also had a temper, not the loud, explosive kind that would have been too easy to document. He had the quiet kind, the kind that expressed itself in a tone of voice, in a turned back, in a hand waved toward the corner of the room. Rosa observed all of it. She wrote none of it in her red notebook. Not the turned backs, not the waved hands, not the slow erosion of being treated as something less than a name. She understood the way her mother had taught her, that bitterness is expensive and attention is free. What she wrote instead were numbers. Because at night, after the offices emptied, she could see the screens that the analysts had left open, the printouts left on desks, the quarterly projections left carelessly on conference room tables. She was not looking for anything.
But she was a woman who had spent 22 years reading financial documents, and when you spend 22 years doing something, your eyes simply know where to look. And what her eyes saw, over 18 months of night shifts, told a story that nobody in that building during the daytime seemed to be reading correctly. But what she didn't know, not yet, was that someone had been watching her.
Doctor, Constance Webb had founded Webb Capital 14 years ago from a rented desk in a shared office space with 2 employees and a business plan that everyone told her was too conservative, too slow, and too focused on things that didn't produce the fastest returns. She had ignored every one of those people and had built, quietly and carefully,
One of the most respected mid-market investment firms in the country. 2, $1 billion in assets under management, a flawless compliance record, and a reputation for hiring people who were, as she put it, actually good at the work. She had known Gerald Vega, Rosa's late husband, when they were both young analysts at the same firm 30 years ago. He had been brilliant.
He had died too young, of a heart that gave out before its time, leaving Rosa with a teenager, a mortgage, and 22 years of experience that the world had not yet finished using. When Constance learned, through the quiet channels that connect people who have known each other a long time, that Rosa Eliana Vega was cleaning offices at night, she did not call immediately. She watched first. She sent a junior associate, quietly, carefully, to verify what she had heard. And what she heard back confirmed what she had suspected. Rosa had not stopped being an accountant just because the world had stopped calling her one. Constance called on a Tuesday. Rosa was in the service elevator when her phone buzzed. She almost didn't answer. It was an unknown number, and she had learned to be careful with those. But something made her pick up. "Rosa," said the voice on the other end. "This is Constance Webb. I don't know if you remember me." Rosa remembered her. "I'm going to ask you something direct," Constance said, "because I don't have patience for the other kind. Are you happy where you are?" There was a pause. Rosa looked at the mop handle in her hand. She thought of her mother's red notebook in her front pocket. She thought of the numbers she had been reading on those screens for 18 months. Numbers that told her that at least one of the firms whose offices she cleaned was about to make a very expensive mistake. "No," she said, "but I'm learning things." Constance said, "I know. That's why I called." What happened over the next 9 days would later be described by people who were not there as a remarkable turnaround story. People who were not there always make it sound faster and neater than it was. What it actually was, Rosa sitting across from Constance Webb in a glass-walled conference room for 4 hours on a Wednesday morning, walking through everything she had seen and read and quietly calculated over 3 years of night shifts. Not from stolen documents, from open screens, from discarded printouts, from the kind of information that floats freely through an office when the people who work there have decided that the people who clean it are invisible. Constance listened. She asked 3 questions. Sharp ones, the kind that cut to exactly the center of the thing. Rosa answered all 3 without hesitating. At the end of the 4 hours, Constance folded her hands on the table and said, "I have been looking for a director of financial analysis for 7 months. I have interviewed 24 people. I would like to offer you the position." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What would it pay?" Constance told her. Rosa picked up her pen and wrote the number in the red notebook. "I'll need 2 weeks," Rosa said. "You have 11 days," Constance said. There's a situation developing that I need your eyes on before it gets worse. The situation, as Rosa quickly confirmed when she began her official review, was Hargrove Capital Partners.
Specifically, a series of investment decisions made by Preston Hargrove over the previous 14 months that had been misrepresented in the quarterly reports in ways that were at minimum ethically disqualifying and at maximum the subject of a regulatory investigation that had in fact already begun. Rosa had seen it coming. She had written the shape of it in her red notebook 8 months ago. Webb Capital was not the investigating authority. But Webb Capital was the largest minority stakeholder in 2 of the funds that Hargrove Capital managed, which meant Constance Webb had standing legal, financial, and moral to request a formal audit. And she had chosen 9 days after hiring Rosa Vega to request exactly that.
The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday. The 42nd floor, the mahogany conference table. And Rosa would be there as Webb Capital's director of financial analysis. The person who had prepared the audit request, who had structured the financial review, and who would now, for the first time in 3 years, walk into that building through the front door. She wore a dark gray suit. Her mother's red notebook was in her bag. On her lapel, small and gold, was her mother's brooch, a tiny bird in mid-flight that Pilar had worn every day of her working life, through 40 years of other people's floors, as a private reminder that she was always going somewhere. She did not stop at the service entrance.
She walked through the glass front doors, nodded to the security desk, and took the elevator to 42. Preston Hargrove was already in the conference room when she arrived. He was speaking to 2 of his senior analysts, his back to the door, his posture projecting the specific kind of ease that belongs to men who have never had a reason to be nervous in a room.
He was talking about the audit with the tone of someone who considered it an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. A matter of paperwork, of formality, of showing the appropriate people the appropriate documents, and having the whole thing go away by Friday. He turned when the door opened. He looked at Rosa. His face did the thing that faces do when the brain encounters something it cannot immediately categorize. A small hesitation, a fractional recalibration. And then something in his eyes shifted. Just slightly. The ease began to leave his posture the way air leaves a room when a window opens. He knew her face. He did not know how he knew it. He could not have named her, he had never tried. But his body recognized something that his conscious mind was still catching up to. He had seen this woman before, and she had been holding a mop. Rosa sat down at the mahogany table. She opened her folder. She looked up at him, calmly. And she said, "Good morning, Mr. Hargrove. I'm Rosa Vega, Director of Financial Analysis at Webb Capital. We're here to walk through the audit request. Shall we begin?" He sat down slowly. His 2 senior analysts exchanged a look. Nobody waved her toward the corner of the room. What unfolded over the following 4 hours was not a confrontation. Exactly, Rosa was not interested in confrontation. She was interested in accuracy. And the audit documents she presented, careful, precise, sourced entirely from the firm's own filings, were accurate in the way that only someone who has been reading a situation for 18 months can be accurate. She knew where the discrepancies were. She knew when they had started. She knew what decisions had preceded each one and what decisions had followed. Preston Hargrove's lawyers tried 3 times to redirect the conversation. Rosa redirected it back, politely and without raising her voice, each time. She used the phrase the numbers indicate with the calm of someone who has spent a long time trusting numbers over people. By the end of the session, 2 things were clear to everyone in that room. The first was that the audit was going to proceed fully, formally, and without the paperwork by Friday ending that Hargrove had been assuming. The second was that the woman running the audit was the same woman who had been cleaning this office every Tuesday and Thursday night for 3 years. One of Hargrove's own analysts had recognized the name on the Webb Capital badge and had quietly looked her up on his phone under the table. The word spread through the building the way words spread through buildings, quickly, and with accumulating force. There is a moment in every story like this one that people talk about afterward. They talk about it because it is the moment when everything that was invisible becomes visible. When the ignored thing turns out to be the thing that mattered most. Go back in your mind, go back to the moment she walked through those glass front doors. Watch who stepped aside. Watch who held the elevator. Watch how a person moves when they know exactly where they're going and why. The regulatory investigation, which had already been underway for 4 months, moved with considerably more speed once Web Capital's audit documents were formally submitted. The full review would take 7 months. But the headlines began within 3 weeks. 3 of Hargrove Capital's funds were placed under formal review. 2 of the senior analysts involved in the misrepresentation resigned before the investigation concluded. Preston Hargrove himself was removed by the board, quietly, firmly, and without the severance he had expected within 60 days of the audit. His name remained on the building for another 4 months after all was said and done, which is the kind of thing that happens when lawyers are involved. The regulatory settlement, announced the following spring, was for $7 million, a number that appeared in every financial news outlet that covered the story. It included a consent decree requiring the firm to implement oversight procedures that had, in fact, been standard practice at well-run firms for 2 decades. The oversight committee appointed to verify compliance included, as an external advisor, Dr. Constance Webb. Her director of financial analysis wrote the first compliance review. It was 18 pages. Every number was correct.
The story found its way online, the way these stories do. Not through any action Rosa took. She gave no interviews, posted nothing, and declined the 3 podcast appearances she was offered. What put it into the world was a short video, posted by one of the junior analysts who had been in the room that Thursday morning.
Who had recognized her name and had sat very still while she walked through those audit documents. He posted it without her face, just a description of what he had witnessed. The response was immediate. By the end of the first week, the phrase "she cleaned his office for 3 years and he never learned her name" had been used in over 40,000 comments. A reporter from a financial publication called Web Capital for comment. Constance Webb's office released a single statement. Ms. Vega is an exceptional financial analyst whose expertise speaks entirely for itself. Rosa, for her part, said nothing publicly, but she wrote something in the red notebook, in the small, clear handwriting she had inherited from her mother. She wrote the date. She wrote the settlement amount. And underneath it, she wrote what her mother had said to her the morning she graduated from college. The people who make the money are not always the smartest ones in the room. They are only the ones who stayed in the room long enough. She had stayed. Through 3 years of night shifts, and turned backs and hands waved toward the corner. She had stayed and she had watched and she had written things down. That is what her mother had taught her. That is what Pilar Vega had carried through 40 years of other people's floors. Not bitterness, not resignation, but the quiet patient, understanding that the room eventually reveals everything. 1 year later, Rosa established the Pilar Vega Fellowship. In partnership with a community college 2 miles from the house where she had grown up. The fellowship provides tuition, mentorship, and a paid internship placement for 5 students each year, specifically students who are working full-time while pursuing their education. Students who are, as the fellowship description reads, building something while the world isn't looking. The first cohort of 5 fellows were announced on a Thursday morning. Rosa attended the announcement in a dark gray suit. On her lapel was the small gold brooch, a tiny bird in mid-flight. She did not give a long speech. She said only this: "My mother cleaned offices for 40 years. She filled 17 notebooks with what she learned. I hope what you build is worth writing down." If this story stayed with you, if you felt something when she walked through those front doors, please like and share it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a room where someone looked right through you? What did you do with that? Here's what really gets me about this story. It's not the reversal. Reversals are satisfying, but they're almost the least important thing here. What gets me is the red notebook. The fact that Rosa Vega, in a blue uniform on a night shift, was still doing the work. Still reading the numbers, still writing things down. Not because she thought anyone was watching, not because she was building a case, but because that is who she was. A woman who understood that paying attention is itself a form of dignity. That is what her mother gave her. Not a career, not a connection, not a rescue, a habit of mind. a way of being in a room. Preston Hargrove spent 3 years in the same building as the woman who would eventually sign his firm's reckoning, and he never turned around. That is not bad luck. That is what arrogance costs you. It costs you your ability to see what is actually in the room. So here is my question for you, and I truly, really want to know. Please leave it below. Is there someone in your life right now who you might be treating like part of the furniture? Not out of cruelty, just out of not looking. Because sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply, finally, turn around.